Okay, welcome back. This is another episode of my 10th level Paladin. I don't know how many of these I've done, and I don't know the order anymore, so you shouldn't worry about it. There's another one in the queue after this. Anyway, I'm talking to Dave Margowsky. He's a friend of mine from college. I've known him 30 years now, right, Dave?
Yeah, a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have
Dave ended up.
pictures of you in a tuxedo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dave ended up marrying a friend of mine. I didn't even know they knew each other. This is the funniest thing. She was the first person I tried writing a screenplay with when we were in college, and something always got in the way of us finding time. And then she graduated, and I didn't talk to her. And then you and I became friends through the game store, and it turns out you knew her. And she
I
used to
did.
date Dave Lepore, who turned out to be garbage human being. But that's oh, he's garbage, absolute garbage. I'll say that loudly on my show. It's my show. I can absolutely say he's
Hey, you
garbage.
can call anybody garbage you like.
So anyway, Dave's claim to fame, and I don't know what character he's picked today, but Dave's claim to fame is it gonna be? Is that your
Oh,
favorite
yeah,
character? All right,
absolutely.
then we'll
Yeah.
just let's get into it. Tell me about Manhammer. Tell us about Manhammer.
Well, hang on. I want to know, like, do you drop the jingle in after
I
for
don't do a jingle. What jingle?
there's my 10th level paladin jingle?
No, there's nothing. Did you hear music on the episodes?
My 10th level paladin. No?
Yeah. You nailed it. You nailed it. That's it. We don't have the money to pay for every episode.
All right.
So.
All right. So yeah, my favorite character is Thom Manhammer, who is a dwarf fighter. So second level.
Let's be
No,
very clear. This is in the age of that's all you could be, right? You had just two descriptors for your character.
it's not that far back. It's second edition Dungeons and Dragons. So at that point, I think you could be like a few things. I know every class could be, or every race could be um, a different rogue class. You could always play a thief, right? um, is it okay if I say race on the show? I know that they've removed race from
right.
all
We
of
call
the
it
books
species now because it's more comfortable for people.
Ancestry,
But we can call it whatever. I don't care.
But yeah, he was the original game that he was played in, and again, I've chosen Thom because of several reasons you alluded to in the intro, but uh, uh, as a character, he was fine, right? There was nothing spectacular about him. I got to do the fun dwarf gravelly voice that everybody does when they're playing a dwarf, and he was a fighter. And there's a few reasons why I chose him. Like when you asked me to do this, I of course started going through my reams of player characters. I actually very nerdily do have folders downstairs that have like every player character that I ever created for any game, and I have like computer files for the ones that I don't actually have in the folders downstairs. So
just to clarify, Dave and I have not hung out in years, and this is why.
So it started off, it was a Forgotten Realms character. Yay, Forgotten Realms. And I had like a nicely, not too intricate of a backstory, because I never like to write a whole bunch of backstory for characters, because most of the time they were going to end up dead pretty quickly. But he was tied into some of the Realms lore, and so I started playing him, and he was a fine character. What was interesting is I played him in a couple of different games, and there was a game where I got to share responsibilities with another GM. So I would run the same group of PCs, except for my own character, of course, and he would run alternate. So in fact, you met Mason.
Yeah.
He would run alternate, and I got to play Thom both as a PC and as an NPC. And what was awesome is when he was a PC, he was a fighter, so very straightforward, battle axe, almost a barbarian, right? Unique features of Thom were that he had a 10-pound cannonball that he found like on his first adventure and carried that thing, I think, for the rest of his life. So just randomly on my character sheet was a 10-pound cannonball.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you never know.
I
Um,
remember the story you told me where you were trapped in that sphere, that force cube or whatever it was, and all you had was
it's
the
the 10 pound.
cannonball to get out, and you were saying, "What would you do?" You were asking me out of game because I wasn't playing with you guys, and I just remember this story. I said, "What the hell? Why do you still have the 10-pound cannonball if you're inside a force cube?"
Because my strength score was high enough that 10 pounds was irrelevant. Is kind of, I think, the answer there, right? Um, what I found was as I played him as an NPC, I was way meaner to him when I was the GM. He was much
Right,
more of a buffoon character.
right,
So instead of talking about every occurrence, right? Because I literally played this character for years. There's two highlights. The first highlight was as a GM, there was a masquerade, right? So it's this fancy event, and it's like the elite of Waterdeep, because of course it's set in the City of Splendors, in the Forgotten Realms setting. I'm gonna go heavy nerd on you for a moment, and so everyone has like elegant little masks and like capes and ball gowns and stuff, all of the different characters and PCs, and so I made Thom show up in a bear suit. So and drunk and kind of sticky and stinky because we had a friend who had stolen a Mr. Munch costume from a Chuck E. Cheese, and so like that was very comedy to us at the time. And so yeah, he was basically in a bear suit. That was the Mr. Munch costume. But when he was a player, he was very, when I was playing him on the PC side of thing, he was, trying to be cool and an adventurer, as you like to say, a Conan, right?
right.
But I think like the one time I really remember as a player was he traveled with another dwarf who was like a champion of Moradin. And during one of our fights, he got laid out. The champion got laid out, and instead of like fighting and trying to get revenge, Thom grabs the body and starts running him back to town because he was so involved with that character's success and like abilities, and he was like the icon character. And I think that was like a very telling moment for the character, because the shift, he started to shift from being just a straight fighter to trying to like learn more about religion, which I thought was a big arc change for that guy. And so I played this character again a long time, a lot of different things. It started to become like I would use Manhammer in a variety of places. Like I had an email address for it, and
Mm-hmm.
I started to use it on video games and that kind of stuff. In fact, I had a World of Warcraft character that was Manhammer until until somebody reported it, because apparently if you look up Manhammer
Yep.
on like Urban Dictionary, there's
Oh, oh, I
yeah,
didn't know that.
oh yeah, it's terrible. And again, I was very young, so it was more of a naivety thing as opposed to like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's terrible. So I started using it in a bunch of other areas. And as you mentioned, my wife, who is a screenwriter, wasn't a screenwriter when we started going out, but her first gig was for the X-Files. So,
Yep.
unbeknownst to me, until the air date, there was an episode, I think it was season 5, with the lone gunman, and they're at a convention, and one of them is playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I was like, oh, cool, fun, and one of the characters says, Lord Manhammer, and oh my gosh, lost my shit, and apparently what had happened was she had mentioned that her, I think it was then fiance, it might have been husband, I can't remember the timeline anymore, had played D&D and had a character, and when she told the staff the name of the character, they all lost it. And we're laughing so hard. They said, "Oh yeah, we're using that." So
Yeah.
that is my claim to fame, is that my nerdy Dungeons and Dragons character name is used in the X-Files. So I'll take it.
And now belongs to Fox instead of you. You can't really use it anymore.
Probably. You're probably right.
You have signed away your door.
Trademark. Yeah, exactly. And what I think what's also funny is like I spell Thom, Thom, which is really Tom, like it's an alternate spelling for Tom, but because I was, a kid and didn't realize that, oh no, you have to have two M's if you want it to be Thom, buddy. I'm like, I don't care. That's how it's said. It's fantasy. I don't have to follow the rules of English or anything.
So what about Thom? What about Mr. Manhammer?
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to go look it up after we're done here.
What's that?
I'm going to go look up on Urban Dictionary what Manhammer means. I'm sure I understand. I'm sure I already know.
Don't do it. And anyone listening to this, don't do it.
I have 2 words on Urban Dictionary, stuff I made up.
No, I didn't. No, that's
yeah,
awesome.
I have 2 words on there. They've been approved and everything. Really horrible stuff. Really horrible.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So what about Thom made him even a micron different than a regular dwarf fighter? Because I know all dwarf fighters are essentially the same. I played mine a little bit differently because I'm always looking to do it a little bit differently. But he's still a dwarf fighter at the end of the day. So
again, I think for me, right, because it's such a long period of time that we're talking about, like honestly, like we played last year Dungeons and Dragons. We're still playing. We're doing some 5th edition stuff. And Randy ran some stuff. Our friend Randy Theus.
Yep.
Ran an adventure also set in the Forgotten Realms. So he brought back some of the old characters. So what made him different? At the beginning, I'm going to say nothing really made him different. Right. I mean, quite honestly, it was a very standard-y type of character. If anything, he was maybe a little more humble. I was never a guy to try and play a character that was like the badass. I was not really into the whole Conan paradigm. So he could be the butt of a joke, and it wouldn't be like an offense to him. He'd laugh it off. It wasn't a big deal. So I'd say maybe that's it. But it's pretty thin. Over time, I think that transformation to realize like, well, I can be a drunken, brawler all my life, or I can try and do something different. And again, I'm speaking in the voice of the character as opposed to me. So I think that changed to start adding some cleric levels. And again, depending on the system you're playing in, you do that differently, right? I think that change in character was important because he started to not be as much of the butt of jokes and trying to do things that were like bigger and more, more positive for the dwarf community, depending on what dwarf community we're talking about. So, not much. I think more of my love for the character definitely comes from the fact that if I mention this whole scenario in terms of the X-Files, there's, people go, what? And, want to look it up and verify it and that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
I always try and say, when you ask the question, what's your favorite character, I always try to make the next character I'm playing my favorite character. I think that's kind of something that you're always trying to do. And I'm fascinated. Like I started thinking about, well, how do I go about creating characters? And I actually started to like kind of develop a process for myself. And I find it's much less about what the character can do in terms of mechanics and stuff. And I still tend to play crunchier games than you do. I'm not a huge fan of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, though I've played a lot of it because it's easy to get into a game. Right. I honestly, with this one, I like a little more crunch, which is funny. When I'm playing con games, I like those to be very story based. I mean, you and I have had great sessions of both Apocalypse World and I'm trying to remember the last time I saw you. We played
Fiasco.
Thank you. Yeah, Fiasco, fantastic game. But for like ongoing games, I like there to have that feeling of progress, and like, yeah, you get a little bit of Benny, get a little bit of a level up.
That was going to be my next question, which
Sure.
is how it took Manhammer a long time to develop because of the way you guys played. I sat in on a session, and leveling up wasn't really something that felt like was happening anymore. The characters had plateaued, and there must have been long gaps where Manhammer was the same crunch-wise. He was the same character from session to session to session to session. And I find, and this is my taste, is that if you do that for too long, people are going to get bored. They need to see the development because they at least want to see the character be able to do something new.
Yeah, I mean, again, really depends on the system you're playing, but I think if you're playing something longer term, then what you're saying is true. You want to see some kind of development. You want to see some change, right? It's just like when you're watching a movie, you want to see a story arc. If the character starts and ends the movie the same, was that journey worthwhile, right?
Right.
So yeah, it took a painfully long time, I think, in some aspects. But it was kind of like it's a comfortable character to play for me.
Right.
Like it's easy to slip into. I know what he's like, which I think is a big distinction, right? When I was making characters in earlier days when I was younger, I would say, well, what is this character like? You know what I mean? Like the mannerisms, what kind of voice are you going to affect? Because I like to give a character a voice that's not my voice. And I think more and more as I've gotten older, I look at characters' goals as a more important element. Like, how is this character going to approach this situation? How does this relate to the goals that this character has, as opposed to, what are my affectations? So the progress, I can't even remember, to be honest, how long he was just a fighter. But I think at a certain point when the characters we were traveling with were no longer the same characters, and that icon character that I mentioned dragging his corpse back to get healing or resurrection or whatever was required. I think it was resurrection. I think he was dead. I remember when that character was no longer there, him kind of having a void, or me having a void in playing him.
Right.
Where he didn't have that character to look up to, and started to feel the need to fill the role.
Right.
So that's when the cleric levels started happening. And then at a certain point, when we stopped playing the same contiguous campaign, right? We tried other systems, we tried other things. I definitely stopped playing with the regular group at various intervals, or few months at a time. And like when I played with you and Mike in college days, we did a lot more different systems, the L5R phase, and all that stuff. When we finally went back to this campaign, it was me running, and so he was completely an NPC. So it became much more of a narrative device for me. He was a quest giver type character, and had advanced in the clergy enough that he had a minor role in the temple and that kind of thing. So for me, it's not that I wouldn't play the character again, but he's definitely become, in my mind, like very much an NPC character. It's not a character for playing. It's just a fixture of my version of the Forgotten Realms, and it happens to be a shared version because so many people got to play in those games, and we're all still nerdy.
When Mike and I were talking on his episode, the question I asked him was, do you feel like you're doing the best gaming of your life? And I think if I'm going to ask you something like that, I'm going to ask it differently. Okay. Do you feel, because of the people you were gaming with and because the systems that were available, that you really got the most out of Manhammer, or those experiences out of second edition? I'm not casting aspersions, right? I've sat in on your sessions with that group, and I've gamed with you with Mike.
Yeah.
And I know that there's a quality difference without casting judgment. There is a qualitative difference between those two experiences for me.
Absolutely.
And I wonder what you didn't get out of that experience that you really wanted to.
I'm not going to say like I didn't need to have that qualitative difference with this character specifically.
Right.
Like I don't feel like I'm happy with where this character is. I'm happy with the narrative till now. But what I will say is I am not currently probably having my best experiences role playing.
Yeah.
And it's not that the folks that I'm playing with now are less than or different from, but there isn't in my current groups, and even in the past group, like even in the regular group, right? To distinguish between playing with you and Mike, which we played regularly, but we only played for probably, I don't know, what, a 2 to 3 year period, would you say?
Yeah. It was yeah.
I will say that even with that group, there weren't champions of role playing in that group. And when I say role playing, I don't just mean like role playing in Dungeons and Dragons. I mean the groups were not excited about role playing games in the way that you and I and Mike are excited about role playing games, both from a like, games are awesome and this game does different things and there's different levers and hey, there's this whole story game movement and they're talking about I can't even think of you know what I'm saying when I'm saying this, like I heard you talk about running Warlock.
Yeah.
It's things like agency, things like lines, right? There were not those folks. And so it would become difficult for me because I would want to try new things. But if you're going to try a new thing and there's no other champions, then you have to become the champion of the new thing, which means you have to spend a lot of time reading the new thing enough so that you can then explain the mechanics to everybody else. Right. And how does this new thing work? So I feel like there was definitely a time between playing a bunch of Dungeons and Dragons, probably through 3rd edition, right? I mean, 3rd edition, we jumped from 2nd to 3rd when that transition happened.
Yeah.
And I still think 3rd edition is fantastic. I think there was a lot of really good changes to the game that happened between those editions. We even tried 4th edition when it hit, wasn't to our taste. And we moved to Pathfinder, which was just essentially an extension of 3rd edition. I think there was a period towards the end of that when I was very tired of that style of gaming, which again is it's the very crunchy kind of stuff, very, very Dungeons and Dragons-esque, although I know that there's a big old OSR community who would say, well, no, 3rd edition was nothing like the original Dungeons and Dragons, where I started to dabble and I would pick and choose things that I wanted to see because they sounded fantastic. Things like Apocalypse World, things like Fiasco. There's probably a handful of them, and I probably have lists somewhere that has a few more that I'm like, no, I really want to see how this handles this mechanic. Even stuff like what was going on with like the last Marvel game, where you're using the dice pool mechanics. So I started to just choose things that were of interest to me and try to sell the group to get into the thing. Fate being one of the major things that we played in. We actually did a campaign. The first arc of the campaign we used Pathfinder rules. The second arc of the campaign we used Fate rules. So I would like more flavor in what I'm doing, more variety, but I'd also like less of the burden of having to be the force for that flavor, right?
Right, absolutely. And that's one of the things that you've seen pieces of the book, the GM's advice book that I'm writing.
Yeah.
And that's so one of the things that I talk about in there is just how much work is on a GM's shoulders. And I think fifth has added the most work you've ever seen to an edition of D&D. I think as each edition comes along, the game master just gets saddled with more responsibility and less of the authority to get it done. And I don't want to I don't want to talk too long about that because I've talked about it so many times. But I think that those are the kind of things that now that we're getting older and we do want more relevance and we do want more range of essentially spotlighting, right? You want the spotlight to fall on your character, but in different ways. Everybody wants to be the center of attention for a minute, but Manhammer's center of attention back then is very different than the maybe if you'd started playing him today, the kind of spotlighting you'd be doing with that character.
Yeah, although I will say that he was never he was not a greedy character in terms of look at me.
No. Yeah, I'm not saying that. Spotlighting doesn't necessarily need to be look at me. It can just be this is my moment to do something and have a moment to shine, if you will, where okay, great, the group is doing its thing, we've got a great group dynamic, but wouldn't it be nice if I could just go and sit down and have a beer for a moment, talk to a barmaid, and make that my solitude moment in the story?
Instead of I just cleave that creature in half. Yeah, right. I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Of course you agree with me. I'm right.
It's your podcast.
It's my podcast. I've never had one that's just solely mine, so this is pretty awesome having this level of authority. I'll just cut anything out I don't like you saying.
That's awesome.
I don't cut anything. I have no reason to cut anything.
I thought this was a finely edited machine.
You listen to them. We might as well be drunks in a bar. No, that's not how it happened. I rolled a 1d8, not a 1d6. You liar.
The 1d8. This whole concept, my 10th level paladin reminds me very much of the squid page.
Yeah. Wow, you are going back in time.
Right?
You want to explain that, or should I explain that?
The squid page was Jim's editorial page when you were the editor, right?
Yeah.
Of Shadis magazine.
Yeah.
And he asked me to do an illustration for him because for some reason he thought graphic designer meant illustrator. But of course I said yes.
I still have that skull you drew in college for your final that you gave me.
Skull.
Yeah, a skeleton skull thing. All that white space. You gave me the original. I have it framed.
I'm glad.
So I assumed you could draw because you drew a skull.
Yeah.
Anyway, I love that squid. Go on.
So I did this drawing of a squid, and the idea of the squid page was that, everybody wants to tell you a story about their game.
Yeah.
Oh, there was this one time. Yeah. Which is essentially what this is. So
John hated those. John hated my squid page. Because he would get upset that I was ranting and raving, and here I was sharing stories, right, in an impassioned manner. Right. This is something great that happened, and I can't believe they did this stupid diagonal wall here because it doesn't make any sense. That would be my squid page. That's how I would use it. And then, after FanCon, I would use it to thank people, and it really wasn't about me. But, every chance I get, this was before blogs. This was before, any real social media. I was using the magazine as this sort of platform for...
Electric light had just been invented, right?
What's that? What? I didn't hear.
I said electric light had just been invented.
Yeah, the electric light had just... Well, holy crap, I started, 96?
Yeah, it's a while back.
Yeah, a while back.
Well,
I think... go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say I find it interesting that you're still kind of hung up on like somebody telling you their Dungeons and Dragons story.
There's nobody doing this right now, right? And for the longest time, this is why I came up with this. The longest time, we in the industry treated the guy that came to the booth who said, "Let me tell you about my character." We treated them with disdain, right?
With the eye roll.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's great. You might have a great character, but I've heard this story 50 times this weekend already. Please spare me. But that's not how it should be. Some of my best stories at Gen Con are talking to people about their campaigns, listening for details. So there's something here in what you've said, maybe, that I don't
Probably
know.
not.
Maybe people will enjoy the X-Files part of this. I don't know.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
But I want to celebrate for a change instead of doing my nasty podcast style that I've done with other people. That's what I wanted to do here. I wanted to celebrate it. I want to be able to say, okay, Manhammer's not my favorite, but
You mean your typical tearing down of all that is
all that is normalized in the hobby, right? Throwing 75
No.
to 6 when you're playing Shadowrun. That's normal. That's okay. There's nothing weird about that.
No.
Don't
Especially
you
if
dare
have the
challenge that, Jim.
right level of wired reflexes. I mean,
Oh my God. See, now you're making me hate my own podcast. You did it, Dave. You did it.
I think the problem is there needs to be, you need to help people to understand that the cool things about their characters are the things that they bring to the character.
Yeah.
And not the things that the book brings to the character, right? Not the fact that you took these 3 feats and when I do them all and the same thing, I could do 96 points. That's not what's cool about your character.
I didn't ask you your AC. I didn't ask you your level. I don't care about any of that
You want
stuff.
the stats? Because I can.
Dear Lord. Please go to Dave's Facebook page. He will be posting his stats for Manhammer, along with a link to Manhammer on Urban Dictionary.
What I wanted to say, though, was I always go back to there was one game that you ran, and I don't know if you remember it.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're going to say. Go ahead.
Denny Labrie was my character.
Uh-huh.
And it was, I know that Mike was in this game. I think Lenny was in this game. I feel like there was one other player, but
I think it was Dan. I think Dan was there.
Okay.
I know Lenny's the one that ruins the ending, but go on.
Didn't ruin the ending. I think that was what was spectacular. And this was L5R rules, if I'm not mistaken, but it was in a Western setting.
Yep.
Which, right, samurais and Westerns are not that, right? And man, that was like probably the single sweetest session of a game that I ever played. My character was the kid who thought he was a gunslinger. And we dealt with race, we dealt with age, we dealt with so much in such a short setting. And in the end of the game, someone's character shoots the woman that we were helping for the whole thing.
Yep.
And everyone at the table just kind of went, oof, because none of us could blame the character for taking the shot. And yet every character was just deflated and defeated. And it was the most like, all of the excitement and joy went out, but it was just fantastic. Like it was like the best ending. It would be a great Western.
Yeah. Well, I can't say that it would because I wrote it and ran it, but I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I think that the elements are there, right? The pacing was there. What
I'm curious was the rule for the miss there, right? Like that's always the mechanical mind. Like when I'm running a game, I know what would make the narrative sense,
right?
Would be exciting for the story, but I always like to have a little bit of like, is this within the mechanics of what I'm doing right now? And
it was Lenny who did it. Lenny's the one that shot the old lady. He was trying to save her. For those listening who weren't there, he was trying to save her, but he rolled so poorly. I think it was all ones or something. It was so bad.
It was bad.
I just said, okay, well, yeah, you shot her instead, because he was holding her up as a hostage and everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was, none of us questioned it at the time.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I look at games that I run, and again, my tendency right now, at least, is to run much more crunchy systems, and many of the crunchier systems don't have those kind of fumble rules in them in the current iterations, right?
Right.
So I always wonder about that. But man, that was a great character.
You should have brought that one up. We could have talked about that for half an hour. Instead,
we talked about it anyway.
Said we're signing off now. So thanks for showing up, Dave. This was great.
Always.
I was sure you were going to bring up Manhammer, and I was right. I finally got one right.
There you
After
go.
6 episodes of this.
Unpredictable.
Yeah. Thanks again, Dave. And that's it. I'm signing off. I don't have a good close. See you guys.
Yeah, well, it's something awkward, right?
Yeah, it's always awkward. Your face is awkward.